This will help make that up, or it might make it more confusing. And in this case, you can definitely cut it.
Hi! So we're being joined by Rohini Acharya. I actually know Rohini from graduate school. We're in the same cohort, but she's in a completely different department. She is an amazing performer. She has studied her type of dance. It's a traditional Indian, South Indian type of dance. You have all the masters. You have like an MFA. That's where I met you in grad school at UH. University of Hawaii, and then after that you went to do your MA, your Master of Arts with NYU. So she was also with me in New York for like a year. Did I get you for a year?
Yes.
Yeah, this went by so fast. And then right now you're a PhD candidate, and
Yes.
you're set to finish in 2022 with your, oh my gosh, and this is your PhD.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's been a whole arc.
Whole arc.
I love it.
Constant school.
Well, your last name is Acharya.
Yeah.
Right? So that
Yeah.
means like doctor.
Yes.
Well, not doctor, but teacher.
Yes. Yes.
So when you're
So
done,
it's a lifelong, it's like kind of in the name. Yeah, I mean, it is in the name, but also just like it's a pursuit, a life.
And your entire family, like you're all teachers.
Yes.
You all teach people.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yes.
Your dad does policy now.
Yeah, he does policy, but he did teach. He was teaching for some period of time. He also has a PhD. My mom also has her PhD and teaches English and anthropology. So a lot of teachers. And I think my grandparents. So it's
Really?
like, yeah.
do you think that the name, like the Acharya name, like helps, like this is what we do? Like, do you think that is what happened, or is it like I just was always interested in teaching?
I think a combination of both. Well, and I feel like a lot of times my parents will always emphasize that to me. They'll be like, it's in your last name. So whenever I was applying for things and they're like, what do you want to do? Just be like, state your last name. And that is what, you're on the path to doing. So combination.
I love that.
So your type of dance, you have to teach me how to say it.
Yes. So Bharatanatyam.
Bharatanatyam.
Yes.
You can
yes.
tell me it's terrible.
No, Bharatanatyam. No, that's perfect. That's exactly how you pronounce it.
And there's an aspirate H right after the B.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly how you say it.
Nice. Okay, cool. And that's in Sanskrit.
So the name, it is a Sanskrit name, and it literally translates to, so Bharata was the name of the sage who wrote this text on dramaturgy called the Natya Shastra. So that first part of Bharata is meant to evoke the author Bharata Muni.
Nice.
And then Natyam meaning drama. So essentially really recognizing the dance form's roots as a theater dance practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about
Performing arts practice.
The arts, the performing
The arts, yes. Yes.
I love it.
So it was primarily practiced in the courts and temples of South India. Actually, a lot of the ancient sculptures, you will see like dancing women, dancing gods, right? So there's a lot of, I think it goes back like centuries at this point, like thousands of years. And it continued to be practiced in the courts and temples, and it was primarily a practice by Devadasis, and Devadasis were women who were dedicated to the temple. So this was really their primary practice. Beginning 18th, 19th century, there was a decline in the status and the status of the Devadasis and this practice as a temple tradition, primarily because under British colonization, it was seen as this immoral practice because of the patronage system that supported the practice of Devadasis. So it fell into this decline, but later in the movement for India's independence and the effort to revive Indian arts, there was a big push to bring this dance form back. They renamed it Bharatanatyam, so it was an intentional naming, and now it's practiced. It can still be practiced in the temples, of course, but it's practiced everywhere. A lot of stages.
Okay.
Across the world.
Tell me about this patronage. What is the whole, like, what's not okay for the people that came into India?
Well, I think because they received patronage, and again, support meant many things, right? Or in order, if they were receiving support, what would they give in return for that support? So that practice was seen as immoral because they were sleeping with the patrons that supported them. And so ultimately it was seen as prostitution. And of course, it was a really outside perspective. So that is what happened. And so it's a really unfortunate history, I will say, because as the practice started to become more prominently practiced, it was really taken up by like upper class and upper caste men and women, therefore marginalizing this community of hereditary practitioners, the Devadasis. So it's a sad history, and I think it's something that a lot of conversation is happening around, like how do we recognize this history as it continues to really grow as this global practice.
Okay. Was it usually like performed by women? Is it men and women? Were they children of like the practitioners?
Under the, like when the Devadasis were practicing it, it primarily women, although there were like, men were often the accompanists, right? They would accompany the woman. And so that's a community in itself as well. But it was primarily women.
So what does that dance practice look like if it was primarily women and then you have the shift to like men? Or, do you see like very different like movements or stances or like?
There can be, but honestly, I mean, in terms of just, well, I think you do see it in terms of its characterization, like distinctions between like how men would stand and how women stand. But ultimately, I mean, if you're all playing like the same characters, if you're conveying a particular story, men will assume the same, like we all assume the same positions. Like there's no distinctions there, if that makes any sense. Okay. I remember I had one teacher tell me, because I think I had asked her, I said, you know, do men portray this dance differently than women? And she said, no. I mean, they're men and women in this dance, right? Like, why would they be portraying anything differently? Like, you're taking on some of the, like, you're portraying a man and a woman in this dance. So why would a man portray it differently than that? So we're all taking on the same characterization, yeah.
There's no distinction.
Yeah, but there can be some, like, in terms of, like, maybe the way like men might stand in position, they might keep their hands more on their hips, women like more on their waist. So there's some subtle distinctions there, but.
Who were these women dancing for? You said that they worked in the temple, like that was their job. So what were they doing? Are they dancing for a specific deity? Are they taking care of like the normal temple like work, day-to-day things? Like what exactly
I think they were primarily for patrons, but they were like wedded to a deity essentially. So it was in devotion to that particular god whom they were wedded to.
Okay.
So it could be, I mean, whoever like the primary god of that temple. Sometimes the temples in India, it's not many gods that are worshipped in that space, but it's selective gods.
Right.
So it could be a very specific god that was worshipped, and that's who they are, you know, performing in devotion of, but obviously are also being supported and watched by the patrons who supported the temple. So songs that they danced to were composed by men. So, and that was also a specific community alongside these dancers. This community of men who would accompany the dancers and compose these songs were also teachers as well. So I think what happens was, as like the reputation of the hereditary practitioners fell into decline, however, like I think these men were left, their reputations didn't quite fall into decline. When the dance form was revived, men and women were a part of that revival. So it's hard to say actually that it was primarily. At one point, it was like very much women. I mean, yes, these Devadasis were women. They were primarily women. But then in its decline and as it starts to be revived, there's so many different figures that play into it. So it's hard to say if it was just like exclusively continued to be women or if it was like, you know, it's also men are in that factor as well.
Is this a way to achieve like higher forms of consciousness? For either the dancer or the people that are watching? Perhaps it's both. How do you think it plays into the whole like enlightenment consciousness?
Absolutely. Great question. That was a really great question. So with this dance practice, and that can be actually applied to a lot of Indian classical dance practices as well. So there's no separation, right, between the physical and the spiritual, and practice becomes a way to achieve one. And this can also be applied as a philosophy to this dance form. But in terms of achieving consciousness, as it is devotional in nature, the dancer, as they are conveying the stories and emotions of the compositions, are evoking a type of bhava, emotion, expression, sentiment. That is then received by the audience, and this is called rasa. And rasa is defined by the emotional qualities that the audience receives from the dancer. So there's definitely, that's how consciousness is being achieved through rasa bhava.
Okay,
In a
so
performance.
it's a dance between the both.
Yes.
Between the two.
Between the
also.
two, yeah. And, you know, there is a way to be an audience member and to really feel the emotions of the performer from the performance. You have to be knowledgeable in that practice. You have to be knowledgeable in what you're seeing. And so the knowledgeable spectator is called a rasika, because they understand what those emotions are in the piece.
Only specific types of audience members.
Yeah, it's considered like, oh, you've studied it. You know what you're looking for.
Okay.
Yeah, which is
Nice.
really fascinating.
So, well, I mean, traditionally, when this is all being watched, like it's it's assumed that everybody has always heard these stories and they're really familiar with it. So I guess it would be somebody who's really maybe who's thought about it or taken it to a different level of understanding or consciousness, I suppose. Is that what a rasika is?
Yeah, and I mean, who's really invested also in the literature is right. They're familiar with it through just upbringing, being surrounded by it, immersed in it. But I think there's also a way in which there's a lot of epics that form the basis for what is performed. And so when you have that knowledge of the stories, you have to really read for those stories. So I think that's a way in which you're engaging intellectually with the material as well, in order to really access what the piece is about and what are the emotions that are being expressed through the dancer.
Do you have a favorite story that you've performed?
Yes. So I love all pieces about Krishna.
Really?
Every piece about Krishna I love.
Why?
Because Krishna is so fun. Right? There's so many really fascinating stories with Krishna, right? Krishna steals the butter from the gopis. Krishna lifts the mountain. Krishna destroys demons left and right. I mean, it's just there's so many fascinating Krishna stories. And so it's really fun to be able to portray Krishna through dance. And there's one piece that I've done. It was it's a 45-minute piece. It's a long piece. It's all about Krishna. So you start with Krishna as a baby, and then through the years, and just conveying different stories.
Oh, that's fun. So it's very dynamic.
Very dynamic.
And he's also kind of like a jokester.
He's a social butterfly. I mean, I think Krishna just has a lot of fun qualities that is very fun to portray through dance.
I feel like you have a great laugh. By the way. I know you're telling you have a great laugh, but honestly, I'm hearing the Krishna thing and I'm like, oh, okay, it makes so much sense. I'm like, you are very, very happy and bubbly, and you have the most amazing laugh that is one of the hugest things I remember about you in grad school, and that's the exact that's a thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm like, oh, it makes sense.
Yes.
We're just slaying academic papers.
Yeah. I know, when life gets too serious, just bring Krishna back in for a moment. Be evoke some of the playful qualities that he has.
Good. I'm all about play. Do you feel like you channel him? He's a very easy deity for you to channel for that reason?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, I believe so. Because I think I also embody that.
Yeah.
And people will tell me, actually, when I did my yoga teacher training, and there was some point in which you had to connect with the deity, or they give you, I forget exactly how that process is, but I think, everybody is going through the teachings and is I really connect with Ganesh because of this quality. And so I always gravitate towards Krishna, and actually it was told to me as well, like Krishna is your deity, you know?
love it. Just all these things, like just reinforcing, that's so funny.
And and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes total sense.
I love it. Okay. Wow, that's great. Is meditation part of like the practice?
It really depends on perspective. That's one thing I will say. Because I feel like there are some practitioners who are like apps. It's you can't separate, right? The dance is the meditation. You know, you enter that state, especially in order to really access these emotions and convey them to the audience. You know, there is a meditative quality there. For me personally, and meditation to me has always just been about groundedness and just feeling centered within myself, and I achieve that most clearly with my dancing. So there's something about just the different positions in this dance practice. They're all very grounded. They're all as close to the ground as you can get. And so whenever you hold those positions, or for me, whenever I hold those positions, I find that I'm just able to stay there for some time. Like I don't even have to move necessarily. And so that is where I access meditation or some sort of meditative quality in the practice. And I think that can be felt from a lot of practitioners, perhaps, even if they're accessing that in different ways, or really kind of, maybe some teachers are like, no, this is such an integral part to training in this dance form and then performing it. So they might emphasize it in different ways.
The movement. Yeah,
the movement, or even also like just in terms of like meditation, like what meditation specific, like what philosophy underlies that in order to really like cultivate it as a meditative practice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny, like a lot of, I know, like as a Buddhist practitioner, it's like a lot of seated meditation, but meditation is also, it's like a consciousness thing, right? So you can achieve that sort of level, different levels of being enlightened or awake, right? Like that's all it is.
Yeah.
Like what level of awake and awareness are you at? And you can achieve that through dance, you can achieve that through playing piano, you can do it through anything as long as you're within alignment. And I suppose a certain type of flow.
Absolutely.
Where it's just like so effortless.
Absolutely.
Do you feel that when you perform? Like you just feel like you are like...
all the time. And I think it takes a long time to get there. And I think that's the part of, with any practice.
Right.
Initially, you're like, you really notice how much your legs hurt and how much pain you are in holding your arms out a certain way. But again, through repetition and really cultivating that technique, everything starts to fall into alignment. And then you are really able to access that inner breath, that inner quality that sustains you further than it being just about like, okay, physically I'm going through these emotions. Like everything just starts to click into place. And yeah, you do feel like you're flowing. And it's a very powerful feeling. And so I love it.
Yeah. I love that feeling, that like feeling of flow, and just like you're not thinking, you're not anticipating, you just are.
You just are, yeah.
Yeah. I've had that like in piano, and of course it's like after like practicing like so many hours, right, for that performance, or even in yoga. Right?
Yeah, and it's powerful. The moment it clicks, and you're just, it's not a moving through with ease, but I think there's just something about like you feel energized from every part of your body, right? Like there is also something that is, you've accessed a part of you that I think also enables the flow as well. And that's really powerful through performance and through yoga and through all other arts practices.
I was reading up on the dance style. It said that it was really well known for keeping the upper body and torso very, very static while having bent knees, as well as having colorful use of gestures in the face and hands. So mudras and stuff. Do you believe that the hands are actually activating certain levels of consciousness? What are they doing? What are their functions?
So there are three components to Bharatanatyam technique. The first is nritta, or pure movement. And so that's essentially like movement for movement's sake. So this is like very rhythmic movement. Even when the mudras accompany the footwork, it's just punctuating the rhythm. It's not necessarily like conveying a story or meaning or emotion. But then there is nritya, and so that is really when mudras start to convey a particular story or meaning. So that is like the very narrative component of the dance form. And then the last is really just the combination. It's like the drama of it all, natya, in which again you will have the use of mudras to convey a meaning, emotion, a narrative, etc. So those are like the overarching ways in which mudras get used by dancers. In terms of, I bet there is a particular way in which they're activating some sort of consciousness, especially within, again, this underlying philosophy that there's no separation between the spiritual and the physical. So I believe that the mudras play some role in bridging those reality, right? Bridging that separation. But I don't think it's, again, this is from my own experience. There might be other Bharatanatyam practitioners who have really done work on this, or like have created further ways in which like it's actually activating. So like the ways in which like, yeah, in yoga there will be the use of a mudra to achieve a particular state, right? Or to like heal something, or, and I think with Bharatanatyam there's more work that I have to do really to understand that component of the practice, if it's activating a particular consciousness. But in terms of its components, yes, like, I mean, in terms of like the narrative component, yeah, there is a consciousness that's being performed and conveyed and received by the audience members, but maybe not in the way that we are defining consciousness here.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair. We had a conversation about mudras like earlier though about it, and I thought it was really interesting how you were talking about like, oh yeah, like you were talking about this. What is it? Tripitaka.
Tripitaka, yes!
Yes, okay.
That's super impressive.
Thank you, I listened.
You were talking to me about this mudra. Can you tell me about that? Like,
yes. So this one, so Tripitaka literally translates into 3 parts of a flag. So as I was saying earlier, right, like when we're going through the different components of Bharatanatyam, so sometimes when this gesture is there, you're doing a movement, it might just be punctuating the rhythm. It's just there to really highlight that. But then the other component, of course, is the narrative part. And so all of a sudden this gesture can take on multiple meanings depending, of course, on the story that you are telling. So if you're talking about a king, this might come to be, you know, how you signal the crown that they're wearing, right? That's like how you're literally conveying that in order for the audience to understand that, yes, I am a king. Or you're talking about a king in the abstract, but then this mudra would be used to really highlight that.
okay.
Yeah. Or you can also, I know, like if there's a sequence in which you're portraying a woman getting ready, you know, like this can become what they're using in order to put their makeup on, their bindi on, you know, etc. So it takes on different meanings depending on what story is being told in that component of Bharatanatyam, that nritya component.
Imagine as a performing artist, like in general, that is basically like what happens, right? Your entire body is an instrument. So it's like every piece of it is conveying part of that story.
Yes, it's highly nuanced in the way, yeah, it's your eyes, even just, I mean, the eyes expression, it's so hard to train in that actually. I mean, that coordination between the hands, the eyes, the feet, like there're just so many intricacies that are happening there.
They make you train in eyes.
Yes, because the eyes are really key to conveying, again, depending on what the component is, but it's highly expressive. Like it's so integral to conveying the emotion of the piece, a mood of the piece. And in some classical dance forms, expression can actually be, you can use the lips right? There's some dance forms where you're mouthing some of it. So that's a part, that's another training too. Or the eyebrows come to figure in as well to that expression. I mean, naturally sometimes eyebrows do, but there's a way in which that's being manipulated specifically as a form of expression within one of the dance forms. So it's very, very intricate system.
That's amazing. I love that. These are all things that I'm gonna have to pay attention when I watch you dance.
Yeah.
And I've seen you perform too, which is fantastic. You're literally in every program that you've been in. You're literally the only person that's doing your style of dance.
Bharatanatyam does have a presence in U.S. dance departments, but it's still growing. There's a lot more. There's a lot more room for growth, and so what ends up happening is you will probably, if Bharatanatyam is your practice and you pursue it through academia, you might end up being one of very few, if not the only person who practices that form.
Your family is originally South Indian, right? Which is where the dance comes from. Is it a self-study for you, since you've decided to go into the academic route rather than just going straight into I just perform?
It's so interesting too the way I got into studying Bharatanatyam, because my parents are not, I think my mom studied Bharatanatyam very briefly as a kid, but she didn't continue to study it. And so actually they're not performers. They don't have a basis. They weren't particularly interested. No, they love dance, but they're not whoa, they follow all sorts of dancers anywhere. We're really invested in it. But with me, I think they really wanted me to study dance because I think they just saw within me some sort of potential to go far with it. And we're able to really support it because, again, they are academics and are humanities academics. So they really didn't see it as a limiting major to pursue as I was getting ready to go to undergrad. They're yeah, you should study dance. You should see if they have a dance department and go forward with that. And so yeah, I think for me, continuing through that, I think one of the things that I'm really focused on in my own research is trying to figure out how these practices are developing in the diaspora. What does it mean for it to be a diasporic practice? If you are Indian American in this country, what are sort of the things that you're contending with with your identity, and how does that manifest? If you are practicing dance, how does that manifest through your dance practice? What are the changes that are going to happen to this dance form as it's continuously practiced in the U.S.? So that's something. So in a sense, it is a self-study, because I think that's what I'm trying to, that's my position, right? Yeah. Indian American, trying to figure out my identity here, and have practiced this dance form for so many years. So I'm trying to always figure that out through dance.
How old were you when you started dancing?
I was 6.5 when I started dancing.
Oh my God.
Very young.
So you've been doing this pretty much almost since you could walk.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, from the time I could start walking, I was just I was dancing all over the place. And so, yeah, they were okay, we can, we want to put her in dance.
I love that. Your parents were just get this girl a stage.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny too, because people will be were your parents performers? Or did your mom study dance? I'm no. Because I think often what happens is yeah, they have that really strong connection to the performing arts. And so when you put your children into it, you have a basis for it. But I think my parents were a little bit just no, we like this dance form. Yeah, my mom studied it for very little, but I think she just wanted me to study dance, and she wanted me to study an Indian dance form. And I could do that here in the U.S.
Was that her way of trying to make sure that you stay connected and very steeped in a certain cultural practice?
Yes, I think partially. Also, they were particular. They just really liked Bharatanatyam.
Really?
Yeah.
I love it.
So, I mean, ultimately, if I had said, I actually really love ballet, I think they would have encouraged me to that as well. But no, I think this is also a way they were we love this dance form. We know our daughter will love this dance form too. Oh, she loves this dance form. We're going to continue to support her.
Was this always in your head? You were going to be a dancer. You were going to always be connected?
Yes and no. I think you give into a little bit of, you go to undergrad and you're okay, I applied for their dance concentration, and And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. But then you also are like, oh, do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to try law? You're like experimenting a little bit. And so I think I was a little bit in that phase as well. To be honest, just because I think sometimes you get trapped within like the pressures that is the undergrad experience, and
Right.
where your friends are all on like the pre-med track and you're like, wait a second, should I be on that track too? But no, after my undergrad, I very clearly was like, no, this is what I want to pursue or continue pursuing. So I found my way back onto even though I stayed on the path, but was kind of wandering a little bit. But then I was like, definitely after undergrad, I was like, no, dance is your full-time thing.
You could have started teaching when you were 15, right? That's part of the practice. There's like a certain cultural thing that happens at 15 or at a certain time.
So you have your training. So once you completed your training, Bharatanatyam training, you have what is called an Arangetram. An Arangetram means solo debut. And essentially, it just means like a 2.5 hour to 3 hour performance for the community. So I know it's a lot. Typically, it happens for happens for the majority of people at high school. Like that's like the average. I think 14, 15 is the average age to do your Arangetram. There are some people who will do their Arangetram as early as 8 years old. I mean, they are like really immersed in. They're like ready. It's like they're from a family of dancers, so they're like ready to do that. Yeah, so they do it really early. Some can do it that early. Some people do it as 18. Some people consider that like kind of older because I think you're getting ready to go to college. I think once you go to college, it's a little bit harder to do your Arangetram just because your interests. People do it, but I think your interests are a little pulled in a lot of directions. I know one of my dance teacher's students, I think she was in her 60s when she did her Arangetram. So there's really actually no set age to do your Arangetram. It really can happen at any age, just depending on where you are.
And you had told me in a previous conversation that this type of dance is something that you can practice throughout your entire life.
Yes.
Wow. Does that practice change over like the age, like in terms of, I guess, the types of movements that you would do, right? Or is it pretty much just like fixed throughout, like these are the standards? And
I think one of the things with this dance form, because there's such a strong emotional component to it, and I think you do get more in touch with it with age. Right? When you're younger, there's certain themes where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm learning the expression, I can do it, but you haven't really grasped what that is. And I think age really gives you the ability to grasp what those emotions are. So I think that is why it is one of those practices that I think you can really sustain into an older age, just because there's so many other components you can focus in on rather than it be like, continuously physical all the time. That might actually kind of slip away for you in some sense, but there's still so much to this dance practice. There's still so many other components to this dance practice that doesn't make it like a purely physical dance form.
Makes sense.
It's all physical is defined in so many different ways.
I love that you make no distinction. It's like it's all like part of it. Like there's no distinction between like the physical practice and like the spiritual practice. It's all like integrated.
Yes, it's the philosophy.
I love that. I was also reading that that there's a little bit of incorporation of yoga poses in there. In your experience, how does that play into dance?
That's a great question. For me, actually, I don't feel like it was always stated that this is a yoga asana, that we would be, if we learned a movement. Mm-hmm. So in some sense, I'm like, I know I can see some of the yoga poses, but I don't really like recognize them as asanas directly. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think just from my perspective, I didn't recognize them as yoga asanas. Mm-hmm. But then I think a lot, again, as I said earlier, with the research that people are doing or really trying to integrate more yoga with this practice, like make those connections much clearer. Like I think they are really naming certain poses within their asanas as well. So
okay.
Yeah.
So this is just more for like people to be like, oh yes, if I'm going to do this
backbendy thing into this yoga pose.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Keeping things organized in people's brains.
Yeah. No, it's a great. Again, it's a complex question. If you had like a round table of Bharatanatyam dancers, right? Perhaps might be some people who be like, yes, right? That was always a part of my training. Our dance teacher made us do like yoga along with studying Bharatanatyam movements. I don't feel like that was a part of my training. Like that was something, like later on I studied yoga, and still there's like, there's connection, but there's also an interesting, it's not a separation. I think there's just a way in which sometimes like I tend to separate things, right? Like, so I have yet to kind of bring both practices together in a way that I'm like clearly able to sort of map what those connections are between yoga and Bharatanatyam. Well, it used to be it used to be really interesting because I had a yoga. I mean, when I was in India studying Bharatanatyam for further training, and I did go to a yoga teacher, and she used to be like, "Your Bharatanatyam counteracts the yoga." Like, so she was kind of the belief that like of a more like a slower flow, and somehow saw Bharatanatyam as opposite of that, and therefore actually like not supporting it. And that is very, and I wondered if that stuck in my head a little bit, or if there's some way in which I'm like, well, that's fascinating, like I've not been able to quite bridge that, or because she said that they're opposite. I mean, that was one perspective, but like, but yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you for having me.
God, Christy.
I love it.